Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Couple of Nukes. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Whiskey, and this episode will be coming out not too long after the holidays, and it's a wonderful time for everyone to get together. But we also do see, unfortunately, a huge spike in suicide and depression around the holidays, especially those of us who live alone or a bit more isolated. And so this episode ties in with that because we are going to be talking about grief, about how love never ends, and that the loss of someone, it's a physical thing, but those memories are always there. And we're going to talk about how even as believers, death is still a difficult topic for anyone. We have the love and promise of God's everlasting kingdom, but that doesn't mean it's not hard to say goodbye to the people we care about. And we have a guest here today who has created a way and a center of resources for people to come together to express their grief, to find some peace, and to help their faith, because death is one of those major events in life that can really shake up a person's faith. So we are here with Kevin Skellett to talk about the Love Never Ends ministry. Mr. Kevin, would you please go ahead and introduce yourself for us?
Yes, I'm Kevin Skellett. I am an author, a pastor, and founder of Love Never Ends Ministry, which I founded um, a number of years after I lost my son to suicide. And that was really the main reason why I started Love Never Ends, to help other parents who had lost children. And recently, at the beginning of this year, we converted that over to more of a ministry for all types of grief and loss. And it's just been very helpful, I believe, to a number of people. We do workshops, we do online groups and things like that as well. So all those things really to help people who are struggling with any type of grief or loss.
Right, every type of grief is so difficult, but especially we always say that to be a parent and lose your child is especially hard, and then to have it be suicide. It's suicide in general leaves the people around and connected to that person with so many questions, with guilt, with regret, kind of this self blame. And we'll get into that actually, if you don't mind answering. How did you feel when your son took his life? Did you have, especially as a parent, as a father, did you put the blame on yourself?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that was one of the big things that I had to deal with, was just the shame and the guilt of it being a suicide, and then trying to figure out why my son Mark took his life. He had a lot going for him, and I know that he did have some mental health issues, and that was certainly a contributing factor. And he had a number of other things throughout his life that I think probably led to his decision to take his life. But I came to those realizations long after, trying to blame myself, and I had to really work through a lot of that guilt and shame, and finally get to the point where I could forgive myself, and just kind of let that go, because there was just so many unanswered questions that I would never get the answers to anyway, and just
Right.
putting all that on myself and trying to carry all that, that was just way too much. And God brought me to that point where, you know, forgiveness is the key, and letting go of these things that I was trying to hold on to, which I didn't need to. And that was really him telling me, you can let them go, give them to me, and we'll work through them together. So,
I think that the forgiveness of ourselves is often the most difficult, especially when there are so many questions, so many what ifs. And I have to ask, were you a pastor at the time, or did that happen afterward?
I was in the process of becoming a pastor. I was taking classes to become licensed as a pastor. I was actually in a class that was required. I was two-thirds of the way through the class when Mark took his life, and I needed to get through that class to get my license, because I was planning on marrying my other son later on that year. So, yeah, it was. I was on my way to becoming a pastor. I was already, I'd given my life to Christ. I was serving in a lot of ministries at our church and things, helping people with divorce and other types of recovery types ministries. So that was kind of where I was when I was um, when this all happened. I did complete that class because I had most of the points were right there at the end, and so that was kind of hard trying to complete all those assignments and everything, going through the grief, going through the memorial service, all those types of things. But I had a grace-filled instructor for that one, so that was certainly helpful.
So would you say the difficulty came about? Was it mainly because you were distracted by the grief, or was it you were starting to have doubts about God and the world? Did it kind of shake up your faith?
It did not shake up my faith. I'll tell you, the morning that I found out, I got the police detective had called me about 8:30 in the morning,
Hmm.
and he asked if he could, meet with me. And I said, "Well, what do you need to meet with me about? What's this all about?" And he wouldn't answer me at first. He kept dancing around that. And then finally I said, did I do something wrong? He said, no, you didn't do anything wrong. It pertains to your son, Mark, and I'll be over in a little bit. And he hung up. And so
Wow.
I just had to go through, well, why is the police calling? So at first I thought, well, if it was an accident or if he was hurt, the police, they would have told me where he was or what hospital he was going to.
Right.
If Mark was arrested, I figured Mark would be calling and not the police. And thought maybe Mark was being investigated for something, but that really wasn't his nature. He didn't do things like that. So eventually, I got to the point where I thought, well, this sounds like a death notification, and so before I'd gotten the official word, I had already come to the conclusion that Mark had passed away by some means. I tried calling his phone, but it went directly to his voicemail, so I couldn't get any information that way. So the first thing that I did, I was home by myself. My wife had already gone to work, and my older son and had gone to work, and our younger son had gone to school. So I just sat down on the couch and figured I needed to talk to someone. So I wanted to talk to God, and so I started out thinking it was going to be a prayer, but I don't know if it was so much of a prayer or not because I just kind of put my hands together and bowed my head and just said, "Father, my son is dead." And God immediately replied back into my head. And he said, um, my son died too. I know exactly how you feel.
Wow.
And that just brought a lot of comfort right there. It's kind of hard to get mad at God when he's answering
Right.
you, things like that. Um, and uh, so I sat there for a minute and then he said, by the way, he's not your son. And so I had to wrestle with that for a little bit because I was
Right.
thinking, what does that mean? I was there when he was born. I'd been with him all his life. He looks like me. Um, and as I was going through all that, it seemed like a long time, but I don't think it was just a couple seconds. And then God said, he's my son. I gave him to you. And the only thing I could think to respond was say, thank you, Father, for the time you gave me with Mark. And so in those just few, probably less than a minute, God had taken me, brought me comfort, really told me who Mark was as being his son. And then he got me to be thankful on what would become the worst day of my life. It was just a very powerful conversation and probably one of the most intimate conversations I ever had with God. And then, he was just continued to be with me throughout the whole process of getting to the memorial service and all that. He wanted me to speak at the memorial service, and he put all the words in my head. I didn't have to write a thing down. It was just really strange. It was just things would pop into my head about Mark, about what to say over the next 3 days, and it would all come together. It all came together I guess, a really good message. Um, but so when when the day of the memorial service came, I got up to speak, and the only thing I took with me, I had a small piece of paper that had a quote from Dune about fear that Mark had in his wallet. So I wanted to have something of his with me up there, and I used that as a transition to really. I talked about all the things that Mark loved. He loved animals, he loved his friends, he loved science fiction, he loved classic movies, all these different things. And he, that's and I got into like the science fiction piece, and I talked about the quote from Dune, and I used that because I was talking about walking through your fear, and um, I used that and said, well, when you walk through your fear, you face your fear. That's really having faith, and then really switched that over and really talked about my own personal faith and told a lot of his friends who were, they dressed all in the black. They had, the tattoos, they had the piercings. And those were the kids that Mark liked to hang out to. A lot of them were gamers and things as well. But I don't think a lot of them had much of a relationship with Christ at all. So I talked a little bit about my faith, said, God is right next to you. He's right there waiting for you to just reach out and ask him questions and begin a conversation, talk with him. Uh, and then at the end, God had me to talk to his friends specifically. And I told them that if you're ever out and you see me, I said, please come up to me and just tell me stories about Mark. And so after the memorial service, we went outside, and I was waiting to go over to the reception, and one of his friends came up and told me he had a story. He told me a story about Mark, and then another one told me a story about Mark, and then soon I had like a line of about 30 of Mark's friends all in a line wanting to tell me stories about Mark. So I stayed out there for about an hour, just listening to story after story. That was just very powerful and really helped with my own healing as well. Just hearing stories how Mark got a refrigerator for one person. He had gotten a cane for someone who had hurt his foot. He threw a wedding shower for a couple who weren't going to have one. He went to see a friend who was performing, and none of the other friends showed up. He was like the only friend that showed up for that. And it was again story after story. And I always wondered where all my money went that I gave to Mark, and I realized where all went that day, buying stuff for his friends and taking care of his friends. So that was really healing as well. So no, I didn't really get mad at God because he's kind of guided me through the whole process of grief all along the way. And I think it was really key to just invite him in right at that very beginning, um, to include him in my grief. And like I said, he's been with me ever since.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm honestly speechless. We've covered suicide a few times before on the show, but I think that was the heaviest story there, especially to know that your son was such a good guy on
Mm.
top of it. And it's a shame. One of my most popular episodes that gets listened to almost daily is Gen Z suicide prevention by integrating faith into social media platforms to bring people off of social media and to Christ, because a lot of people on social media are depressed or suicidal and they're using it as an escape. But a lot of times it actually just fuels that depression further. And to see so many young people taking their lives. I was actually on the show where I discussed about children between 8 and 14 and just the
Mm.
suicide rates among that age group. It's so sad to see that. And I'm really just speechless at the conversation you had with God, because it's really humbling. You know, if you read through the whole Bible, I mean, there's so many calls to humility and so many reminders that, our lives are not our own, as it says in Jeremiah, that, God made us, what he giveth, he taketh away, and to say that he lost a son as well, both your son and Jesus Christ,
Yes.
because we're all children of God. And, every day I think there's a lot of death in the world brought about from the sins of ourselves and others. And I think, it's got to be sad to be God and see that, to see him more than anyone knows what could have been of those lives. I mean,
Mm.
everyone has so much potential to choose either good or evil, or to repent and choose good, and to know that that was taken away because of the sins of this world. It's very sad. And I think, like you said, going to God right away. And I think that's so important. And it's, like you said, difficult to do. So many people, if there's a death or a situation like that, the first thing they want to do is say, God, why? Blame
Yeah.
God. And God, especially that word, you took away my kid. You took away my kid, God. So right away, I think the answer he gave you was humbling, and put you in a place where you could understand better. And it's just very beautiful and sad. It's all poetic. And I really hope that, there's so much out there nowadays to try and prevent suicide, to provide mental health
Mhm.
resources. And I just always pray that those get spread and recognized and used, because every time someone takes their life, about 8 to 15 people are left behind, and people that the person who committed suicide doesn't even know would be affected. There's so many more people. There's so many people in the world who are alone or feel alone, and they don't realize the impact they have. And so, how did this all lead to creating Love Never Ends ministry? I mean, how long after your son's passing did that all kind of formulate together?
And yeah, it's kind of a long path. And so initially, I was in the middle, like I said, I was in the middle of that class, and so I did get my ministry license and started, became a licensed pastor. So that was really the first thing. It was about 2 years after that that uh, I was sent a letter from our local police department. They were looking for chaplains, so they were wondering if people wanted to be a volunteer chaplain. And so I put in my request or put in my answer to that. I said, yeah, I'd love to at least search it and see what it's going to be about. And, made it through all the background checks and all that kind of stuff and became a chaplain. And so on my first call out, it ended up being someone that I knew had died of a drug overdose. And uh, I was there ministering to their family. And it was uh, probably about 5 years after Mark had taken his life. So, but it didn't really matter. I could go right back to that morning at any
Right.
time. And so I'm thinking about how I felt that at that time, and then was able just to minister to the family there as they're just finding out about their daughter who had lost her life. And so that's, I think, um, been a help to me in a lot of those situations as I've been through it myself. And uh, it's also ministering to me every time I go out, just be able to help somebody else in that situation. Um, in my own experience, I had a lot of help and everything up until the memorial service, and after the memorial service, it got to be really, really lonely. People, it seemed like people didn't know what to say or what to do around me, so they just tried to avoid me altogether. And so that was really a hard part, probably the first 5, 6 months after Mark's passing, through going through that grief and just really feeling alone. Um, but one of the other things that I was in the middle of too was a recovery ministry. I was in the process of starting a recovery ministry when Mark passed away, and that proved to be probably one of the biggest answers to my healing as well, because one of the parts of that is that we would get in the group
Right.
and just kind of share what's going on in our lives. So every week, as we went through our training and preparing to launch the ministry, I had a safe place to talk about my grief with people I trusted or people I knew. And so that having that outlet really helped me to process a lot of my grief as well. And God had called me to that ministry too. So, he had already prepared the way, it seemed like. So I had went into ministry, started this recovery ministry, had a place to do the outlet. It led me to the chaplaincy and really start helping other people. And then it was actually, I launched Love Never Ends on the 10th anniversary of Mark's passing. And so it took me a while. Uh, I had thought about it probably 2 years before that, about putting it together. I wasn't really sure exactly how. I talked to some other parents who had lost children, and they were encouraging me. They were kind of getting around me, and then they said, "Well, you need to start this. We need to get going." And so we finally got it going in 2021 in May, and we launched it and started to have in-person groups meeting here just to help local families try to get through the loss of their children. And so we helped a number of people throughout the first few years, and that seemed to work really well. And then we expanded this last year. in going to all types of grief and loss, and started doing workshops and some online webinars, things like that, just to try to reach more people and help more people just to deal with their loss and their grief.
And I think that's so beautiful. I love how people are utilizing technology to spread the word, to connect with one another. And we'll have your website in the description below. And it's very straightforward. I mean, the front page is find grief resources, check upcoming events, and schedule a prayer session. So could you tell us a little bit about scheduling a prayer session, what that looks like? And is that with a group? Is it one on one with you? How does that work?
Yeah, that's just one-on-one with me. I wanted to give a place where people could, if they just wanted to have prayer, where we could talk for a little bit ahead of time, and then I'd go ahead and pray for them specifically, whatever their prayer requests were, to really just help them through their grief. And sometimes it's just good to have a place where you can just talk to someone for a little while. So just set up 15-minute segments or things so we can just talk a little bit and pray. And that's usually good for people, a good amount of time to get through whatever it is that they want to talk about and get prayed for. So that's been something that's we recently did, and we're just looking forward to being able to help a lot of people through that.
No, I agree completely because I think a lot of people in this world kind of struggle with, prayer. They don't know what to say to God. They don't know how to listen or what to do. And I think having yourself available to help guide them, especially when they're grieving and there's so many emotions against God, longing for God to comfort them, yet resenting Him at the same time. I think it's great to have a guide and to have a way to kind of go through prayer together. Then, as far as the events, is that like online, group meetings? Is it in person events? What does that entail?
Yeah, that entails all the both in person and online activities. So we have monthly groups, both in person and online, and we've got some. I think we had a workshop that we just did in November, just to help people prepare for the holidays who are going through grief. I'll be putting up. We're going to have a Blue Christmas service at our church, so that will be going up on there here shortly, and then I'll be doing some workshops after the first of the year as well, some online ones.
Yeah, I know in the beginning of the episode, I mentioned how the holidays can be difficult for
Hmm.
people because of the raise in suicide rates, but also just people who lost loved ones around these times. I mean, I know the holidays can often get scarred for a lot of people or bring back a lot of memories. And I think it's just so important to say, just like your ministry that says love never ends, grief never ends. It comes in
Hmm.
waves. I know, like when my half sister passed away, my mom, it would just come and go. Sometimes she would be outside and see something that reminded her of her daughter, and it would just, like you said, be just like yesterday, just like that morning when you lost your son. It can come back at any time. So I think it's important to, have that, especially around the holidays. And just for everyone to be aware, you're located in Virginia, correct? If anyone's interested in those in person events.
Yep, yep. We're in Central Virginia, right around the Richmond area. And God also had me write a book about my journey through the grief and how He took me on that and everything. And it's called "Gracious Grief After Suicide Loss." And it said, "Feel God's love on the worst day of your life" is the subtitle. And
Mm-hmm.
that was really therapeutic. I did that. I wrote that actually last year and published it right around this time. I think it came out last year, and it was what I tried to do was tie in my story and then also, look at some characters from the Bible who'd gone through similar things and tell their
Right.
story as well. And then at the end of each chapter, I've got a series of questions for people to ask themselves and to really help them work through their own grief journey and hopefully help them answer some questions that they may not think about and just keep them moving forward in their grief. Um, so that's again, that was out last year, and that's one of my resources that I have on the resource page of my website.
Right, your book, and then the 28-day devotional that goes with it as well,
Yeah.
which I think is great. And I think it's important too to remind everyone, especially the men listening, you talked about biblical characters going through grief, and I think one of the most quoted Bible quotes, one of the shortest Bible quotes is Jesus wept.
But,
And I had friends of mine reach out and they were like, why did he cry? And, all that conversation. And it's so powerful. I've discussed before how Jesus cried knowing that he was going to bring him back, knowing that he could bring him back from the dead. So why cry then if you already know he's guaranteed to be alive? And I think the point there was to set an example for men, especially knowing what's going to happen to our world with masculinity and all the changes in what it means to be a man and how men should express their emotions. And I think what Jesus said is that, there are times and places for men to cry, and grief when someone passes away is one of those. So I think
Mhm.
that's so important for everyone to remember, just as a reminder for people who have lost someone or are going through something like that, that it's okay to cry and express your emotions as a man who has lost someone important to them.
Yeah, especially if they can find another man that they trust and really be able to talk to and talking out their emotions. I know that men a lot of times don't like to do that. I don't have too many men attend our groups and things. Mostly women that attend, but occasionally we'll get some guys to attend, and they always feel that it's been really good for them, especially like in a workshop and things as well. If they answer the questions and stuff, they they said, "Wow, I didn't believe that this would help at all," and it just being able to speak about it just really helped a lot. So
Right.
I just always encourage men to find someone that they can trust and go ahead and just let them know what's going on in their heads and try to get that out because a lot of times they just want to act strong and say, well, I can take it and I'll just keep it in here. But the more stuff that you stuff inside, eventually it's going to leak out somewhere, whether it ends
Right.
up in a habit, ends up in anger, ends up in something that's not good usually. And in my recovery ministry, I see that all the time.
Right. And on your website you have First Corinthians chapter 13 verse 8, love never fails. I know the ministry is called Love Never Ends. In addition, it never fails. So how does that tie into everything you do?
Yeah, in some translations, it also translates it as "love never ends." There's a number of translations that
Okay.
do that, so that's why I've got that there. But yeah, I think the "love never fails," "love never ends," both are with that First Corinthians 13:8.
Right. And what is the message there with that you want to connect to grief?
Oh, yeah, because love and grief are so tightly connected. The more that you love the person and the degree of love that you have when they die, that's the same amount of grief that you've got to deal with as well. And
Mm-hmm.
I know that as we were thinking about a name for our ministry, the uh, moms that I was working with, you know, they just wanted to say, we need to focus on the love part of it. And, God
Right.
just kind of brought me that love never ends. And because it doesn't, I'll always love Mark, always grieve Mark, always remember Mark. That's not going to ever go away. And same thing for many of the people that I've lost in my life. Um, uh, and so, the grief part, we've got to deal with that. We got to work through it. And that part's not going to end, but our love never ends either. So they go in that tandem side by side.
Right, for sure. And I think also that God's love for us never ends, even
Mhm.
if through
No.
our grief we accuse him or hate him or grow distant. He's still there loving us through that, whether we reach out to him or not. And he's going to be there waiting for when we're ready. But Mr. Kevin, I mean, it's been such a great conversation. Again, thank you for sharing this story that really is heart wrenching to hear. And I know it's happening all across the globe every day. There are men and women taking their lives, and it's a shame. And I hope that we can be a part in preventing that. And if we can't, that we're a part of helping people process that. And before we end here, if you could share one Bible quote with us, other than the First Corinthians there,
Mhm.
what would that be?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite ones. I think it's Psalm 34:18, and I use this a lot with those who are grieving, is that God is close to the brokenhearted and he is near those who are crushed in spirit. And we just always have to remember that, if we're going through some tough times, God's right there with us, and we just need to invite him into that situation with us. And he's just waiting for us to do that so that he can help in the really amazing ways that he does. And if we don't invite him in, or if we get mad at him and things, we're just postponing those blessings that can be coming along as well. And that additional huge help, because God knows both our mind and our thoughts and all the stuff going on in our bodies and everything. And he's there wanting to heal us, wanting to help us, and just wanting to love us. So that's always my encouragement, is to invite God in. Doesn't matter where you are in your grief process. It's never too late. It's never too early. Just go ahead and invite him in.
Amen. I like that. It's never too late to bring God into it. And I think it's so important because the Bible says they who don't know God don't know love, because God is love. And that's so important. And I smiled there when you dropped that quote, because that's actually a quote that got me through a lot. It's the one I always put forward, because I think it's so important to have that encouragement and know. And oftentimes we are brokenhearted and crushed in spirit. And I always partner that quote with, God knows every intricate part of your heart, and he counts every tear. And I think that's so important to know that God is with us. And so many people see God as a accuser and a judger, and they're saying God's looking in our heart to see evil. But it's so important to know that God also sees the saddest, most grieving parts of our heart. And so he knows our pain, maybe even more than we know, more than others know. So it's important to know that God isn't sitting here constantly judging us to punish us, but he is here, and he knows us more than anyone, and he knows our potential that we have. He knows the pain we're in, and he knows what we need. So I think that's a great quote that you shared, and a partner as well with a lot of quotes, and it can be really encouraging, especially in times of grief. So ladies and gentlemen, I hope you got something out of this, and if you are grieving or you know someone who is, I highly recommend the website. We'll have it in the description below for grief resources, for the events, and I highly recommend the prayer session. I think it's so important to pray with others. And Jesus said it himself, where two or more of you gathered, I am there also. And he's always with us. But, I think faith is boosted in community. And I think when there's a loss, we need to come together. So, Mr. Skellett, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story. And I really appreciate what you do now to help other people.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, and thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Sailing through the ocean blue, nuclear reactors my crew, guiding the ship, the stars as our guide, through the waves we ride, jokes and laughter fill the air. On this voyage we have to share, working together, side by side, as one family we will abide. In the heart of the ship we reside, nuclear operators with pride, powering the vessel with every stride. Our mission, the source of great pride.